welcome to another Victober vlog. It is Victober day. I'm not sure, but the image will know. I am a little bit behind, but that's okay because I decided that today will be an afternoon of reading for me, so I can hopefully catch up. Last week I left you on a cliffhanger, which you can see in Victober vlog week 2 if you want to see, because I was sewing a skirt, but I was missing the right elastic to use for that skirt. It just came in, so hopefully we can finally finish it. But I will say the pockets were perfect. They are very cute and comfortable. Having said that, I finished Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, and this was my live reaction to it. Why? Why? First A Tale of Two Cities, and now this. Why? Oh dear. This book was published in 1853, and I found it really interesting because I see both parallels with The Tenant of Whitehall by Anne Bronte, which was published a few years before that, and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which was published a few decades after that. I think Ruth is often described as Elizabeth Gaskell's version of a fallen woman, and it is. I wouldn't necessarily put it next to Tess of the D'Urbervilles because it's very different. The characters are very different. The amount of politics and rage is very different. Tone-wise, it reminded me very much of The Tenant of Whitehall. So we follow Ruth, who is a 16-year-old girl, and she's an orphan, and she has been apprenticed to a seamstress. She's been working there for a while, as far as we know. Then she meets a man from higher rank. Their interaction eventually turns into her becoming what you would call a fallen woman, but I didn't read her at all in that way. I did have conflicting and difficult and emotional feelings, which I did describe in last week's vlog about this book, but overall I was really impressed by it, and I actually really liked reading this. I can only really review this by telling you the themes of this book because it's so spoiler heavy to talk about it much more. So we have themes of right and wrong, of the way you can interpret Christianity. It's about gender expectations and class power imbalance. It's about parentage and preparing someone for the world. We see this with different characters having a different kind of outcome, and I found especially those themes relating to Ruth very interesting and very well done. It also has a theme of found family and the concept of it takes a village. The family and friendship kind of comes together in this book, and I found it beautiful. I found it very emotional, and I got emotional a few times simply over the friendships. The parts of this book that I didn't like so much is, I guess, I found the exploration of what is right and wrong and how you can interpret Christianity interesting, but they weren't always in service of the characters, so sometimes felt a little bit useless for me as a modern reader to spend so much time discussing that in a way that the book did. I gave this 4 stars. I know a lot of people don't really like this Elizabeth Gaskell. I understand that if you're expecting Ruth to be a character like Tess, for example, Tess has so much more grit and rage than Ruth does, then this may be a little bit of a disappointment to you. If you're an Elizabeth Gaskell fan, I really don't see a reason why you shouldn't read this. I finally got my physical edition of Hester. I'm still listening to the audiobook because it's so amazing. It's so well narrated. I'm still having a great time, although it's losing me a little bit. I'm not sure whether it is because we are introduced to more characters now. Again, it feels very Jane Austen-esque because we have so many potential romances, which is working for me, and we have the introduction of another character that I do find interesting. While she's also headstrong like Hester, I think she has a very different idea of how to rule her life. I do find that very interesting, but I think because I've been reading a book over multiple weeks, it's not necessarily my go-to, so maybe that's why I'm losing interest a little bit. But I'm still having a good time with my 2 chapters a day of that. And then I'm also reading Victober adjacent books. I am 30% in of How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman. I'm listening to this on audio mostly. It's fun to listen on audio, but it would be more helpful if I would annotate this. Oh, it also has illustrations that I've clearly missed. It's definitely interesting, but I think what I said about this book earlier as well, that a lot of this information I already knew. But it was really nice that while I was sewing, I was listening to the chapter on clothing, so that was really interesting, and it does make me think different about the sustainability of clothing, just the way that the durability of our clothes work right now, where we don't wear a lot of layers, meaning that entire outfits go in the washing machine after 1 or 2 wears. And I think that for the durability of especially trousers and sweaters, that's like not good. So layering does help to only wash like your cotton layers. A simple thing like wearing a t-shirt under a sweater will prevent sweat getting to the sweater, and that means you don't have to wash it as much, which is much better for the durability of the sweater, but also for the amount of water and energy you use with your washing machines. I'm getting inspired by the way we used to do things, which usually when I read about history, I get inspired about how we definitely should not do things. Right, and then a historical fiction that I finished that I've actually, it's a recommendation, and that is a short novel called Nightingale. This is mostly about Florence Nightingale in the last, I think, months or even days of her life. She's in her 90s and she is thinking a lot about her time in the Crimean War, but also just as a nurse and a lot of people who are sick who are being so dependent on her. And then we follow her, I think, in the 1860s. It's 1910 when she is on her deathbed, but I think we're in the 1860s when we follow her to the Crimean War. It's possible that I have that date wrong. Don't remember it that well because I listened to the audiobook late at night. While it's not necessarily a disturbing audiobook to listen to late at night, I do think it goes back and forth between timelines and characters a lot that it's not very helpful to read while your attention isn't at its highest. And then we follow both Silas and Jean. And Jean is a nurse who works for Florence Nightingale, and Silas is a soldier they encounter. Jean is an interesting character because she is fascinated by the medical, and we very soon see that she actually wants to be a surgeon, a doctor, more in a way that she is fascinated by the human body than that she has actually a practical ambition to do so. I cannot really say much more about the plot of this book because it was surprising me like halfway through. I was like, oh, is this what it's going to be? And I was so surprised. I think October is also a great month to read it, both because it's, of course, most of the book is set in the Victorian era with such a Victorian icon like Florence Nightingale. But I also found it interesting just the more practical things of the nurses being at war and the relationships with their doctors and the patients. It is a short book and I do feel like some things could have been explored more, like the ending. I felt like, wait, it is done? This is it? It was like a short epilogue and I was not done with the characters at all. Well, I think this is definitely an interesting perspective on Florence Nightingale and not like the main character. I think like the fictional characters in this book drive the book way more than Florence herself does. I think she's more of a setting in place and time. I would recommend this. I think I would also give this around 4 stars. I've started The Romance of a Shop by Amy Levy, which I was supposed to finish during week 2. That was my planning. I am now a little over 30% in of the book. I'm reading it on Kindle. So far, I'm a little bit confused with whom is whom because we follow 4 sisters whose father has died. I know a little bit about Victorian finances and like they're often described as destitute, but they have £600 and I'm like, that's not Victorian destitute, is it? But it's at least not enough for 4 people to live on. I can see that. So they decide to open a photography shop, which I think is such an interesting concept. It is a little bit about photography, but I would like it to be way more. I'm not sure we're getting that because of course it is written in a time where everyone kind of knew the details about how something like that would work, in the sense that you knew these shops existed in streets and maybe you would have gone there once, maybe twice. But I'm just so curious about what a photography shop was. Maybe I should see if it's in this book to see some more details. I think the sisters are quite realistic in the sense that they are starting a business with all its trials and tribulations. I hope it's going to be more about the art, but I doubt it. I think it's very much going to be about the characters. The characters are okay. I get always a little bit annoyed when, I mean, this is very present in Victorian literature always, but when the way someone looks is linked to their character. So we have one of the sisters who is the oldest is described as not being attractive or beautiful, and that is reflected in her character. And I always find that such a lazy way to characterize. Whether you're traditionally beautiful or not says nothing about your personality and your character. And it's always an ick for me with Victorian literature. I mean, I know it's there, but like it's very present in this book. It's fast-paced enough to enjoy reading it, but I'm not yet convinced. We shall have to wait and see. To catch up today, what I have to do is, of course, read my 2 chapters of Hester, and I have some housework to do today. So that is all set, planning wise. Then I would like to finish my skirt as well today, but it's not a lot of work anymore. I might do that in the evening though, or whenever I feel like I need a break from reading, I will go ahead and finish my skirt, which I think I will have put any b-roll before I started talking to you. I have to finish The Romance of a Shop, which is about 140 pages left, I think, and my first 80 pages of a new book I'm going to pick up, which is a book that actually really fits with the fact that I just finished historical fiction about Florence Nightingale, and that is The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands by Mary Seacole. I believe they knew each other, but thematically it's just very similar. It's going to different war zones and different places to be a nurse and to give medical care. But this is then, of course, a non-fiction. I found an audiobook for this suddenly. I think I didn't search right, but there's an audiobook as well. So I might listen to the audiobook for a bit first, or I might use the audiobook as well, because I mean there is a LibroVox recording of The Romance of a Shop, but it's not a really good one. Like, it's good enough for an amateur, of course, but this has a professional audiobook. If I want to listen to more audiobooks, I will listen to this one. I'm doing 60 pages of this one apparently, because I did, of course, before Victober began, I divided every single book so I could keep on schedule. The 60 pages of this, 140 makes 200 pages, so around 220 pages today, which is way more than I would usually read. But because they're audiobooks, and I have some cleaning to do, which is like motivation, I think we can manage it today, and then I can keep reading my planning for the rest of week 3. Then for the fantasy prompt, I'm reading Dracula's Guest. I would like to read more short stories from this collection, but because I'm a little behind, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll save that till last. Hi, it is Victober, I believe day 17. Clearly see that week 3 is not really my week. Reading wise, Victober wise, knowing what day it is wise, my grand plans of yesterday. I mean, it worked slightly. I got halfway through The Romance of a Shop. I have a hard time focusing on that book somehow, because it doesn't have an audiobook, because I am in a bit of an audiobook mood. So maybe that's just it. I don't know. We have been introduced to more characters, which I can see that it's interesting. I just wish, I guess, I could focus more, because I get a little bit lost in that book at points, which is such a shame. But I did start listening to the audiobook of The Many Adventures, oh gosh, what is the very long title? The book written by Mary Seacole. We follow her as she has been married to Mr. Seacole in Jamaica, and I think he passes away. This is again, I think, because my focus is just not there right now. He passes away, and then she goes on a ship. She is in Latin America, because she talks a lot about being around gold diggers, and then not the metaphorical way that we use that word right now, but literal gold diggers who are mostly from the US. She has quite the disdain for anyone from the US, mostly because she says that they are very uncomfortable around black people because of slavery. And I do appreciate that she like mentions it, and that's like clearly an issue for her, which of course makes sense, but I feel like it also would require some bravery, because she's critical of things that I don't think a lot of people had the courage to be critical about. She's critical about slavery, but also just around, she says, people from northern US are also uncomfortable around me. They just don't know how to act. She really dislikes soldiers because they're not clean. I think it's not something a lot of people would have been comfortable being so honest about. So I appreciate that about this book. And then in the beginning of the book she talks about a cholera outbreak and what she does. Things like cleanliness make sense, but I think she was also talking about that mercury is like a good medicine. You know, it will always be Victorian. I mean, I've been trying to just do a little bit of extra makeup just to give myself the illusion of an active day. Get dressed, do my makeup, even though most days I don't even leave the house. It's fine. I did also have to adjust the hem of my skirt a little bit to make sure it's a little bit less bulky. I think that worked out. Put it in the washing now. I'll see. Right, I guess I will see you tomorrow with hopefully some more elaborate update.
He was not a frequent visitor.
Hi and welcome to this week where Victober reading is just a bit slower. But I wanted to make Victorian accurate crafts, and because I'm into my sewing area right now, I found this page of a magazine. I don't know if you can see, but it is from the Ingles Home magazine, and I found this on a website that shares all these magazine pages from Victorian crafts or whatever you want. I will leave the website in the description down below. But this is a bag for holding patches. While I like making useless crafts, it's a lot of fun. I did have all these patches of fabric that I felt like, where do I keep them? Because I have a basket for all my fabrics, but I ordered so many more fabrics on Vinted because I want to learn how to sew better. But that did mean I wanted a place for all my patches. So I found this. I'm gonna make it kind of the Victorian way. The idea is to make it a mosaic, which is just patchwork, but in more, I think, rectangle-like shapes, and you have to embroider everything. Like, I am not doing that because I mean, I could take at least a week to make this, but I don't feel like doing that. So I'm going to sew the seams and then decorate it with embroidery. I know Victorian people would like use hand sewing for everything, but I'm just not feeling that. I have made some marks, as you can see, for how you should decorate this. One of the things they say is to use a silver thread. So I have this gray that's quite silvery, which I'll use in my sewing machine. And then they do have some recommendations of how you can decorate it. I will do with embroidery later on. But first I want to make the bag, and it has little tassels on the back. And I do have little bag with tassels, including these silver ones, so I can hang these on the back. But while I have a fight with, I did something wrong with these little spools, and now I know what I did wrong. But that does mean I need to unspool some spools I did wrong, which isn't going well. But while I do that, we can talk about books. So I'm listening, of course, to Hester. I don't know how to update you on it because I listen like 2 chapters a day. The chapters are getting a bit longer. We get Hester's emotions and feelings on the forefront, and her rationale is kind of getting forgotten in bits and places, which is dangerous for a Victorian lady, or even more a Victorian woman who is not a lady in Hester's case. So yeah, of course, properly nervous about that, what that's gonna do. 75% of the way through The Romance of a Shop, which I should have finished long by now. Thomas Hardy read that I have. I think I will save that for the beginning of November, because I do have a live show for that in the beginning of November. So I felt like I saved that one because I really want to read the Wilkie Collins one, because it has been on, oh no, has been on too many Victober TBRs. It has so many characters and all of them feel a little bit surface level. It took me over halfway of the novel to really understand who the sisters were. Like, some were very clearly their own person, but other ones were very much alike. And then we have a lot of different men who I think in their own right, if they got them more time, will be interesting. So maybe if your focus is way higher than mine is when you're reading this book, you will appreciate how they're in all different classes of society. I feel like class is an important part of this book, and I do find it interesting when the women discuss how they used to enforce certain rules, but now they cannot really afford to do so anymore because they have a craft, there's money to be made. I will say the sisters are a bit whiny. I feel like for women who are like taking up their own craft, opening their own store, and then they're still a bit whiny about things a higher society lady would be whiny about. This book, I do want to give a content warning, has some quite shocking racial slur. Like, not in a somewhat historically accurate way, just in a really random way that I found quite shocking. That together with the author using beauty standards with personality standards, like, my general opinion of this author is lowering a bit. I wish I enjoyed this more because of course I picked it for the underrated women writer front. I guess it could like 3-star. I'm so sorry, but yeah, I'm gonna make this and listen to my chapters of Hester. This is one side. I tried to like feature the flowers quite prominently. Didn't really work on this side. I sewed a little pocket so you can put a little ribbon in it, so it will be like this. I'm happy I chose the purple cuties. Alright, and then this can be the front or the back, doesn't really matter. So now I have to sew one more of these, and then the tassels are coming here. And the other side is finished with the flowers, worked a little bit better. The idea is that this will fit together like this with a string in the top, so you can put it like this and you have a bag. Woo. Hi, it is Victober day 20 and I'm having a wonderful time with my Victorian accurate craft. Let's just say the inspiration and the instructions are accurate, but I'm using modern tools and fabrics because I'm just having fun. I'm not doing anything professional. The bag is now finished and I've done some of the embroidery, so I made a patch that I'm now sewing, that I've embroidered and that I'm making onto the bag. I think next week I'm going to do more paper and wood based crafts instead of sewing. I am still reading Hester, but I guess I'll talk to you about that once I finish it because I'm close now. I don't have that much more to say about it. And then I finished The Romance of a Shop. I really like the ending. As I said earlier in this book, I was a little bit disappointed with the book in itself because we have these 4 sisters and it feels a little bit like Little Women where they all have their unique personality traits, but I didn't really feel that they got to blossom. There was only really one sister who got to blossom into a true personality, and the other sisters were more types, and all of the men that they were interested in had so many similarities in such a short space of time that I just couldn't really care a lot about them when a lot of plot things were happening towards the ending, which would have been so engaging in a novel where I knew the characters better. I just didn't really care what happened to which people. The writing of those plot devices and emotional journeys was really good, but I guess I just needed a more solid base of knowing the characters earlier in the book. So I think I'm gonna give this a 3.5 to say like the writing in itself I like more than the character work. So the character work is really the thing for me where I didn't really hit with this book, but otherwise it's definitely a solid one. And then I have also kind of almost finished The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, and she doesn't lie when she says many lands. Went all over. She went from Jamaica to Southern America to all the way to Europe. She went to London, she went to Turkey, then called Constantinople, all financed by herself. She isn't super transparent, I think, about where her money comes from. I have the feeling that some of her money came from her being a widow and her husband passing away, because she had like such financial means of traveling and having a servant. She does mention a few times that she has a girl, a servant. What I like is that she doesn't omit anything. She is very critical of things that she sees happening. I think this is an eye-opener if you've only really read travel diaries from an imperialist perspective, because yes, Mrs. Seacole has the same kind of prejudice against the native people of the countries that she visits, but you see that there is so much more to human life and to differences between people than often an imperialistic view will make you believe. And that so many issues that we see and acknowledge today, they're they're ages old. I like that this gives a different perspective. Something that I giggle at with this book. She's not only a nurse, by the way, she also owned a lot of stores, and she used sourcing supplies and sourcing food also as a way to take care of people, which I think is a bit of an underrated thing. Again, something that I giggled at is that she says, I'm not full of myself and I won't blow my own horn, but then she shows a lot of letters of people saying how amazing she is. But there are a lot of letters of people who wrote like, oh, I went to so many doctors, but then I saw Mrs. Seacole and I was instantly cured. Yes, it's from another person's perspective. You still select which letters are in your book. So she does boast herself a little bit, which I feel like, good for you. You've done so many things. I have an hour and a half left of this. That are my reads for now. I would also like to read my Dracula short story, and then I will wrap this vlog up, because next week I'm going to read The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I also still have A Pair of Blue Eyes by Thomas Hardy on my TBR, but I don't know if I will get to that during October. I might like do the last few days of October and then I will read it in November. But The Woman in White has been on too many TBRs not to actually read during Victober. So that's gonna be my new actual book after I finish this one and the Dracula short story. It is Victober day 22, we're getting towards the end, and I did do some catching up because I finished both of these. I finished Hester a little bit earlier than the schedule, but when I was in the last 70 pages I felt like I just wanted to finish it. One of the things I like most about this book is that it's so easy to follow, the writing is so accessible, which I think is a bit of a unique thing for Victorian literature, so I really love that about it. Catherine and Hester were great characters, they had such emotional depth and feeling. And with my other Victorian reads, especially A Tale of Two Cities, but also Moonfleet and kind of Ruth, especially the women didn't really get these deep emotions, just a variety of different motivations to do things. Catherine's love for a certain character was very complicated but also beautiful, and Hester's motivation to do certain things was interesting. In the last little bit it wavered a bit and I was like, oh no, what's happening? I really liked the way that Margaret Oliphant chose to resolve it, although I'm not sure how much I liked it the way she chose to write it. The writing was engaging in this book, although the second half was a bit too slow for me. I started to lose a little bit of interest. I think generally this book is a bit too thick for the amount of plot it has, but since I was listening to the audiobook I don't think it bothered me that much. And I also liked about this book that it wasn't too heavy-handed when it came to the morale. These characters are mostly allowed to live and learn, which is so present I think in modern literature. It's like the basis of modern literature, but it's also in here. I feel like these characters were allowed to make mistakes and no one was judged that harshly. It's all just seen as a part of life and people make mistakes. That really worked for me. I definitely want to read more by Margaret Oliphant. If you have a recommendation of where to continue, because this was my first, I would love some recommendations. Also finished The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands by Mary Seacole. I listened to the audiobook for this one. I think there's a new audiobook, but I listened to the older one, which was fine, which was great. These stories were wild, almost unbelievable in places, which makes them even more believable. It's noticeable that she is recounting these stories and that you're not reading a diary. She also says that she has a bit of trouble with her memory. I do feel like we're getting a very filtered memoir, filtered through her memory as something that happened years and years ago. It does provide an engaging read because you're so closely connected to Mary Seacole and to her as a person. And she's very honest about her experiences, about what it was like to travel alone as a Jamaican woman with also a female servant, which doors were open and which doors were closed, and that she had this big desire to help and how she did that in her own way. I found very admirable. The bravery in itself alone to travel to so many different places I found admirable. Also while facing rejection, in doing it in a more more safe and organized manner. She knew that when she came to a place, she needed to start a business and make a living for herself. So she had a hotel, she had different stores, and she also worked as a nurse, just helping people with different problems who didn't go to the hospital. Well, actually she wanted to work with Florence Nightingale, but she also refused. That is a part I really appreciate about this book. I think personally I would have been even more interested if this had some diary entries, or if we had been with her in the moment to get a more full picture, because this does have a lot of gaps. If you're expecting to get a very realistic view of what it was like to travel the world, helping, starting businesses, being a nurse, this is not that. This is really just Mary Seacole's experiences as she remembers it. I think I had the wrong expectations for this book, but if you have the right ones, I think this will be a great read. I did end up giving it 3.5 stars because it didn't quite give me as much as I wanted it to have, but generally very, very glad I read it. I am getting close to Dracula level. I think that next week is gonna be my spooky reads, because I have the short story of Dracula, I have the Wilkie Collins book. I'm also listening to a Victorian historical fiction written now but in the Victorian era, called Victorian Psycho, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's so cleverly written because it feels like you're reading a general historical fiction set in the Victorian era. It feels very normal, very tame, but then there are these small things that the main character thinks, mostly not necessarily says, but the thing that she thinks, just little sentences here and there that are psycho. So yeah, I'm excited for a spooky week next week, and I will hopefully see you there in my last Victober vlog.